Welcome to Deep Dive. In this episode, we talk about one of the more requested topics, the Book of Enoch. We have 3 sources for this episode, which you will see on the screen.
Ever get that feeling that the stories we think we know maybe have hidden chapters? Like there's a whole secret history tucked away in some ancient books.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into the Book of Enoch.
And it's fascinating because while it's not part of the standard Bible for many today, this book was actually really important in ancient Judaism and even in early Christianity.
People took it seriously back then.
They really did.
Absolutely. And to really get to grips with it, we've got some fantastic sources lined up. We've got scholarly perspectives from a companion to the Book of Enoch, an intriguing look at, well, why it might have been sidelined in fallen angels and the origins of evil.
That's a key question, definitely.
And of course, the texts themselves, 1 Enoch and 2 Enoch, all together in the Books of Enoch, a complete volume.
So our goal today really is to try and cut through the layers, understand what the Book of Enoch is actually about, why it mattered so much back then, and maybe why its story still kind of resonates today. We want to pull out the core insights from these sources for you.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Just how old are we talking here, these writings?
We're talking seriously ancient. Parts of the Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch particularly, could go back as far as the 2nd century BC.
Wow.
And what's really significant is that we found copies, actual fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right, I remember reading that.
And these pieces are older than the time of Jesus. That tells us this book was definitely around. People were reading it during that really crucial period, especially groups like the Essenes, it seems.
That's incredible. So it wasn't some, obscure text nobody knew about. It was part of the conversation.
Exactly, part of the intellectual and religious landscape.
And what language was it originally? Did they write it in Hebrew?
Most scholars think the original was probably Aramaic.
Okay.
Then over time, it got translated into Greek. And from there, 1 Enoch was mostly preserved in Ethiopic keys, actually.
Ethiopic? That's unusual.
It is. And 2 Enoch, a slightly different text, survived mainly in Old Church Slavonic.
Huh. And the author, was it really the Enoch from Genesis?
Well, that's the traditional name attached to it. But, given the vast time difference between the biblical patriarch Enoch and when these texts were likely written.
Right, centuries apart.
Exactly. So historians generally agree it wasn't penned by the man himself. But interestingly, there are ancient traditions, like you find in the Zohar, that suggest his original writings were somehow passed down, so the name carried weight.
Okay, so it has this ancient authority attached to it, even if the authorship is complex. So what are the big ideas? What are the main stories, the themes we really need to understand from these books?
Well, probably the most famous part, right at the heart of 1 Enoch especially, is the story of the Watchers.
The Watchers.
Yeah, they're described as holy angels, part of the heavenly host, but they descended to earth, left their proper place.
Okay, that sounds like the start of something big. Why did they come down? What was the story there?
The texts kind of weave together a couple of main ideas about what went wrong, their transgression. One tradition, often linked to an angel named Shemiazaz, focuses on them seeing human women, desiring them, and then taking them as wives.
Angels and humans.
Yeah, and having children with them. These offspring became giants, the Nephilim you hear about.
Okay, wow. And the other tradition?
The other main strand, often associated with a different leader, a Cello or Azazel sometimes,
Right.
that focuses more on the forbidden knowledge and arts they taught humanity. Things humans weren't supposed to know yet.
Forbidden arts. Like what kind of things are we talking about? Magic?
Things like enchantments, yeah.
Yeah.
But also astrology, detailed knowledge about the sun, moon, stars, how to read signs.
Okay.
And significantly how to make weapons, swords, shields, metallurgy. The Book of Enoch basically suggests this flood of forbidden knowledge combined with these unnatural unions.
It led to chaos.
Exactly. A huge surge in godlessness, violence, corruption across the earth. It wasn't just the Watchers falling. They sort of dragged humanity down with them.
And the Watchers themselves, what happened to their nature?
They're seen as having fundamentally corrupted themselves, defiled their holiness by mixing the heavenly and the earthly. There's an interesting idea in the sources that they were almost like priests in a heavenly sanctuary.
Ah, okay.
So leaving that place and getting involved with earthly things was a profound violation of the cosmic order.
So this book is trying to explain evil then. but not just blaming humans.
Precisely. It's this ancient attempt to grapple with where evil comes from, and it points partly to this cosmic disruption, this rebellion within the angelic realm. It's a more complex picture than maybe just, Adam and Eve.
And these giants, the Nephilim, offspring of the Watchers and humans, they were part of this chaos.
Oh, yeah. They're depicted as these huge, powerful beings, often violent themselves, adding to the destruction and lawlessness on Earth.
Man, this is some serious ancient world building. It's quite dark. So what happens? Is there a response from, above? Does God step in?
Absolutely. And this is where Enoch himself becomes central to the story. He's not just the supposed author. He's a character. Yeah. He acts as a messenger, a scribe.
Okay.
He's actually given the grim task of recording the judgment against the Watchers. There's this incredibly powerful vision. It's in 1 Enoch chapter 14, where Enoch is taken up. He sees God on this amazing, glorious throne of fire and ice. And it's there, in that heavenly court, that the judgment is officially declared.
Wow. And what's the verdict? What's the punishment for these fallen angels?
It's pretty severe. The prophecy is that they'll be bound, chained up in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations.
70 generations, that's a long time.
A very long time. And they're forced to watch the destruction of their own children, the giants.
Ouch.
And then after that long punishment, they're eventually thrown into the abyss of fire. Eternal punishment.
So no redemption for them.
Doesn't seem like it. The text describes archangels, like Micheal and Uriel, playing key roles in actually binding them and then cleansing the earth from the mess they made.
It sounds very final, a clear line drawn between their fate and Rogel. Well, what about everyone else?
Exactly. While the Watchers get this heavy judgment, the Book of Enoch also has this strong message of hope and eventual reward for the righteous, for humans who stay faithful. So that contrast is really key. Judgment for the wicked angels, peace and light for the good humans.
Okay, so that's the core story about the Watchers. But you mentioned Enoch seeing the heavens. The book also gets into cosmology, right? Like the structure of the universe.
It does, yeah. It gives us a fascinating window into ancient Jewish ideas about the cosmos. It talks about multiple heavens. Sometimes the phrase heaven of heavens is used, meaning the very highest place where God dwells.
Multiple levels of heaven.
Right. And Enoch, he gets taken on these incredible cosmic tours, guided by angels. Uriel, Raphael, Raguel are mentioned by name in 1 Enoch 20 and the chapters after that.
A guided tour of the universe. What kind of places does he see? What do they show him?
All sorts of amazing and terrifying things. He's shown places like Tartarus, which is described as this dark, fiery place of punishment, specifically for fallen stars or angels sometimes.
Okay.
He sees regions in the west and east filled with burning fire, mountains made of precious stones. Some scholars think this might be a kind of heavenly Eden or Jerusalem.
Wow.
And also these vast storehouses, like where snow comes from, where dew is kept, the paths of the stars, the chambers of the winds. It's like a behind-the-scenes look at how creation works, according to this worldview.
Almost like a celestial weather report center and astronomical observatory combined.
Kind of. And another really important cosmic element I should mention is the idea of heavenly books or tablets.
I think I read about that. Books that record things.
Exactly. The Book of Enoch describes these heavenly records where all human deeds, good and bad, are written down. And also, the names of the righteous are inscribed. These books are super important for the final judgment. It reinforces that idea that God sees everything, remembers everything, and justice will be done.
That's a powerful image. Now, something else that stood out in the notes was this figure called the Elect One. Who is that supposed to be?
The Elect One is, basically a messianic figure that appears in a section of 1 Enoch called the Parables or Similitudes.
Okay.
This figure is prophesied to sit on a throne of glory. Sound familiar?
Very.
And he will judge the wicked, specifically Azazel, the fallen Watcher leader we mentioned, and all his followers. He's a figure of ultimate justice and righteousness.
Interesting. And our sources mention a potential link between this figure and Jesus.
Yes, some scholars see really significant parallels here. The language used to describe the Elect One in Enoch, his role as judge, his pre-existence, sitting on a throne of glory, has echoes in how Jesus spoke about himself, or how he's described in the New Testament, especially with the title Son of Man.
So the idea is that Jesus might have known this book.
It's certainly suggested that Jesus and the early gospel writers were likely familiar with the Book of Enoch and perhaps respected it. The concepts were kind of in the air.
Right.
And remember, the Essenes who valued Enoch, they also had strong expectations of a coming messianic figure, maybe even two, who would bring deliverance. The Elect One in Enoch fits right into that expectation. It's almost like the Book of Enoch provided some of the vocabulary, some of the conceptual framework for later messianic ideas.
That's fascinating. It really shows how ideas develop over time. Now, we focused a lot on 1 Enoch, the Ethiopic one. What about 2 Enoch, the Slavonic one? How does that fit in? Is it basically the same?
It's related, but different. 2 Enoch, or Slavonic Enoch, is generally thought to be a later work. Some scholars think maybe 1st century AD, possibly with some later Christian additions or editing.
So maybe closer to the time of early Christianity.
Potentially, yeah. And while it covers some similar ground, like Enoch's righteousness and his journey to heaven, it has its own unique bits.
Like what?
Well, for instance, 2 Enoch gives a much more detailed, step-by-step account of Enoch ascending through multiple heavens, usually counted as 7 or sometimes 10.
Okay.
It also uses a different term for the watchers sometimes, calling them the Grigori, which just means watchers in Greek, but it's a distinct term used there.
Yeah.
And it includes its own very elaborate story of creation, different in detail from Genesis or 1 Enoch.
And wasn't there something about a figure named Metatron being important in 2 Enoch? He becomes a big deal later, right?
Yes, exactly. Metatron, who becomes this hugely significant archangel, almost a second in command to God in some later Jewish mystical traditions like Kabbalah. He plays a prominent role in 2 Enoch. Some interpretations even see Enoch himself being transformed into Metatron. It's complex, but many scholars think the later traditions about Metatron definitely drew inspiration from these earlier Enochic texts about his heavenly ascent and transformation.
Okay, so we have these texts, 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, clearly influential, circulating widely in ancient Jewish and early Christian circles. But, as we know, they didn't make the final cut for the biblical canon for most Christians or Jews today.
Right.
Our source, Fallen Angels, really digs into why that might have happened. What were the main reasons for this?
Well, this sidelining.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. One of the big hurdles, especially for later church fathers, was figuring out how exactly these spiritual beings, these incorporeal angels, could, physically mate with human women.
Yeah, that does raise some tricky theological questions, doesn't it? It really does.
Yes.
And rather than trying to iron out that difficulty, many influential early church leaders, as our source Fallen Angels points out, found it easier, perhaps cleaner, to lean towards a different explanation for the origin of evil.
Which was?
The rebellion of a single, powerful archangel, Lucifer, or Satan. The story of pride leading to a fall from heaven. That narrative became more dominant, more widely accepted in Christian theology.
Kind of pushing the more complex Watcher story to the side. A more streamlined version, maybe?
Perhaps, yeah. A simpler explanation might have felt easier to integrate into the developing doctrines about sin and salvation.
That makes a certain kind of sense. Were there other factors involved too?
Yes. Another key issue was the angelology itself. The whole system of angels in the Book of Enoch.
How so?
He names loads of angels. Watcher leaders like Shemiazaz, Esau, archangels like Uriel, Regal, beyond just Michael and Gabriel, who are more familiar from canonical scripture. And later on, important early church councils, like the Synod of Laodicea around the 4th century.
Yeah.
This was a big meeting trying to standardize Christian beliefs and practices.
Sure.
They actually made rulings to discourage the veneration or even naming of angels beyond Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. The more elaborate angel hierarchy in Enoch just didn't fit with where the church was heading.
So theological disagreements and these efforts to kind of standardize things played a big part. What about within Judaism itself? Did it remain popular there?
Well, rabbinic disapproval became a major factor too. There's a famous instance with Rabbi Simeon ben Jokai, a really important sage in the 2nd century AD.
Mm-hmm.
He apparently pronounced a curse on anyone who interpreted that Genesis 6 passage, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men," as referring to angels marrying women.
Wow, a curse.
Yeah, which is, of course, the core idea in Enoch's Watcher story.
Uh-huh.
So that kind of condemnation effectively pushed the Book of Enoch out of favor in mainstream rabbinic circles.
Yes.
And thinkers like Augustine, who was hugely influential in the Western Church, he specifically noted that the Book of Enoch wasn't found among the scriptures accepted by the Jewish authorities of his time. That lack of Jewish acceptance was another reason Christians became wary of it.
So it sounds like this combination of factors, tricky theology about angels and humans, the preference for the Lucifer story, the complex angelology, rabbinic disapproval, and its lack of formal Jewish acceptance all kind of conspired to push it to the margin.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah. It gradually fell out of circulation in most Christian communities, except, fascinatingly, in Ethiopia, where 1 Enoch remained part of their Orthodox Church's biblical canon.
Right, that's a crucial exception. But even though it was sidelined for most, did the Book of Enoch just disappear without a trace? Or did it leave some kind of lasting influence? Are there echoes we can still spot?
Oh, absolutely. It left echoes. Despite its non-canonical status for most, you can find numerous concepts, phrases, and ideas from the Book of Enoch cropping up in the New Testament and other Jewish writings from that Second Temple period.
Like what, for example?
Well, the elect one or son of man terminology we talked about is a prime example, but also ideas about the final judgment, the fiery punishment for the wicked, the resurrection of the dead, the active role of angels, both good and bad in the world, and even some of the cosmological ideas like the different heavens. There are definite parallels and resonances in books like Jude, Peter, even the Gospels and Revelation.
So even though the book itself was eventually pushed aside by many, its ideas had already kind of seeped into the foundations. It contributed to the whole intellectual and religious soup from which early Christianity emerged.
That's a great way to put it. It shaped the environment. Its imprint is there, even if the source text became less known over time. It's just mind-blowing, really, to think that people were reading and debating these very writings thousands of years ago. It makes history feel very real.
It really does.
And, that imagery of judgment, the detailed rules given to specific angels, the vision of the cosmos, it clearly resonated deeply with early Jewish and Christian thinkers, even if they ultimately disagreed about whether the Book of Enoch itself counted as scripture.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. We've taken this really fascinating deep dive into the Book of Enoch. We've explored its ancient roots going way back before Christianity. We've looked at its really compelling, sometimes quite dark narratives about these fallen angels, the Watchers, the giants they produced, the divine judgment that followed, and Enoch's own incredible journeys through the cosmos.
Yeah, it definitely offers a unique perspective, doesn't it? A different angle on the origins of evil, the nature of the heavens, compared to what you find in the more familiar canonical scriptures.
Absolutely. And our sources make it crystal clear that this book, or these books, even though they were later suppressed or sidelined by many, they held real weight, real significance in ancient Jewish and early Christian circles. They clearly shaped some of the fundamental ideas, even the vocabulary, that we still encounter in religious traditions today.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Its influence lingered.
Which brings us, I think, to a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on after this. How might exploring texts like the Book of Enoch texts that sit just outside that traditional canon, how might that deepen our understanding of the whole religious and cultural world that early Christianity grew out of?
Yeah.
And maybe what does the story of this book's suppression tell us about how religious doctrines develop? About the forces, the decisions that shape what gets included, what gets remembered, and what gets left behind?
Those are big questions. And if this deep dive has sparked your interest, if you're intrigued by the Watchers or Enoch's journeys or the reasons it was sidelined,
well, we really do encourage you to check out the sources we've been talking about today. A companion to the Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, and of course, the text itself in the Books of Enoch volume. There's so much more detail, so much richness there to explore.